Hello again, everyone. Welcome to your Module 13 preview, where we're going to talk about terrorism and mental illness. Before we get into the Module 13 review, let's take a brief look back at Module 12. Module 12, we looked at fighting City Hall or fighting government institutions, where the mass murderers, target big institutions such as governments or big corporations as a target for their victims. We also looked at hate-motivated mass murder as well. You had some some extra reading to do. There were 3 other articles to read, 2 videos to watch, 2 podcasts, and a couple of other things that you should have taken a look at. Your only assignment for last week were the discussion questions, so hopefully you completed those on time. So let's look ahead to Module 13. So in Module 13, as I mentioned, we're going to look at how terrorism and mass murders are linked. We're going to also look at mental illness and how it plays a role in mass murder. Your material for this week are chapters 20 and 21, as well as some extra supplemental articles to read, some videos to watch as well, and we're going to look at something about paranoid schizophrenia, and a couple other videos as well. Your assignments for this week are going to be the discussion questions, and you have an assignment where you're going to name the killer, which I'll get into in just a minute. So again, your readings for this week are chapters 20th, which is entitled Terrorism as a Tactic. Chapter starts off talking about in June 11th and 12th of 2016, where more than 300 customers, most of whom were Latinos, were celebrating inside of a gay nightclub called The Pulse in Orlando, Florida. Around 2 a.m., as the last round of drinks were being served, an individual by the name of Omar Mateen approached the building carrying a rifle and a pistol and both semi-automatics. Once he was inside, a 29-year-old security guard the 29-year-old security guard, which he was, opened fire on the patrons and then moved from room to room within the club. He ended up taking hostages and shot more people along the way. By 2:18, he had stopped the shooting, so it was only about 18 minutes of shooting, but yet he wasn't still done then. He barricaded himself along with 30 hostages in the bathroom, and he posted a video posted something on Facebook pledging his allegiance to ISIS, and made a series of 911 calls announcing his intention to cause more devastation and amounts of destruction and death to Americans. He also pledged allegiance to his 2 brothers were part of the 2013 Boston Marathon bombing, referring to them as homeboys. Within 45 minutes, 100 SWAT officers and 80 firefighters and medical personnel had arrived. SWAT team took over the operation, and the hostage negotiator communicated with him by telephone, and he told the negotiator to urge Americans to stop the bombing of Syria and Iraq. Shortly after 5 a.m., he had moved out of the bathroom and into the hallway, where he seemingly was shot to death by 11 police officers who fired 150 rounds in his direction, hitting him multiple times. Before he had been taken down, he had caused one of the largest casualties by a mass murder, in which 49 people were dead and 53 more were injured. So the question becomes, are these considered hate crimes or terrorist attacks? And the readings this week talk about how they differentiate between the two. Most people, when it comes to Orlando, this attack, classify it more as a terrorist attack because they talk about how he had some things in his background that will lead them to believe that. Some of the trends in terrorism, in the section, the book or the author defines terrorism as the unlawful use of force for violence against a person or property to intimidate or coerce the government, the civilian population, or any segment thereof in furtherance of political or social goals. One of the biggest differences between terrorism and other crimes is where most crimes look to have power and control. Terrorism is more to send a message, or some sort of, they want to perpetrate some type of agenda. There's countless numbers of domestic terrorist organizations. You hear something called the Animal Liberation Front, Aryan Nation, Black Liberation Army, the Earth Libertarian Front, the Jewish Defense League, the Ku Klux Klan, the Order, the Symbionese Liberation Army, and more of these types of organizations do exist. So the biggest thing with terrorism is they want to create fear or anxiety. And probably the biggest one of those was in 2001 on September 11th, where they wanted to, terrorists essentially killed 3,000 people simply because they wanted to make some sort of example. In 2013, two brothers set off bombs at the Boston Marathon, killing 3 people and injuring 260 people. And that's another example of terrorist organizations, terrorist people trying to create terrorist attacks. People in 2015, there was an example in San Bernardino where during a holiday party, 80 employees in a rented banquet, terrorists came in there, and within 5 minutes, 2 of the terrorists shot 14 employees and seriously injured 22 more. People tend to like to point fingers when it comes to terrorists. Some people look at it as a left side creating terrorist organizations. Other people believe it is the right. The left organizations tend to be places that are eco-terrorism, um, maybe looking at trying to further their own organizations. You might see some minority groups that would feel like they're being singled out, and so they might become as well. On the right-hand side, you look at individuals that are white supremacist or someone that is anti-government rhetoric. You might be targeting people. Some of these people might be white, or mostly white males who lack college degrees, or could be from that example we talked about last week that may have lost their jobs. But we're seeing more and more situations like this during our current political climate. You see some extreme right-wing extremists who are empowered by some of the rhetoric by certain political leaders. You see issues on race, you see issues on immigration, you see government mandates as it relates to like the COVID-19 things. And these angers from these groups as well, that it's also fueled by economic well-being of some of these individuals. Most of these people haven't committed mass murder, but some of their acts could be precursors to what could be considered types of things like this. In 2017, there's an example of white nationalists who were supporters of the Charlottesville, Virginia Unite to Right rally and protest over plans to remove the Confederate flag. An ugly situation turned violent when a crowd of counter-protesters was struck by a speeding automobile, killing a 32-year-old female. The driver was a 20-year-old by the name of James Fields, who had been attended previously held neo-Nazi rallies. There's examples of global terrorism where we talk about people outside the United States will attack certain places for whatever reason, for more so to further their own political agenda. So there's countless examples of international terrorism as well. There's an example of vehicular terrorism. Most terrorist attacks leave a lot of carnage in their wakes, usually using firearms or some type of explosives. You see some other examples in 1993. The World Trade Center in New York City was attacked, where they put a car bomb underneath, or in a big truck underneath the World Trade Center. Sometimes you'll see them putting bombs on like trains and stuff like that. So one of the things the government has been really good at, especially in recent years, is trying to combat terrorism. So there's been different things that have been created. The FBI has been put, basically, I should say, that's their main objective, is to reduce terrorism. Where previously they've looked at other things such as organized crime, they've turned their attention more towards terrorism in recent years. So that is chapter 20, talking about terrorism as a tactic. Obviously, I went through it faster. It's going to take you a little bit longer to read it, but I just kind of gave you the highlights of that. Chapter 21 talks about going berserk, and it talks about mental illness. The chapter starts off talking about a person, a former president, Lyndon Baines Johnson, where his daughter was getting getting married. That would have been a big thing. But at the same time as that was happening, Charles Whitman was climbing a water tower at the University of Texas in Austin and opened fire on the campus, shooting and killing 14 people and injuring 30 more. In a lot of these types of mental illnesses, a lot of these times, these individuals look like they're okay on the outside, but yet inside they're fighting a lot of demons. And when it comes to these types of people, you really don't know what's going on inside of their brain. A lot of these people are paranoid, thinking a lot of them are out to get them, whether it could be family, it could be friends, it could be coworkers, it could be any number of people who they feel are out to get them. These types of people are called autogenic, and they tend to blame society in general for their problems and decide to retaliate against strangers, even though they're not really personally blameworthy of the situation. So yeah, a lot of these individuals might be confused. So they might be targeted. They might think that a particular type of population is out to get them when it's really not that type of populations. So they could be confused as well. Your article talks about some people that were confused. One example they talk about is an individual by the name of Dion Terrace of Kenosha, Wisconsin, and he was apparently prevented him from extracting a lot of his revenge in a society he sought. He lived by himself, had no real friends, and hated the world and everybody in it. Everybody except for people like Ted Bundy, Jeffrey Dahmer, Adolf Hitler, people like that. More than just a serial killer groupie, he believed that the thought process is just like those of those serial killers, except that he was smarter. In addition to his odd fascinations with these types of murders, he suffered from numerous delusions. He claimed to have exhumed corpses of Abraham Lincoln and placed them in his bathtub. 1993 was not a good year for him. He was fired from his job working on cell phones in Motorola. He was upset over being terminated. He went out and purchased an AR-15 rifle from a local gun dealer and ended up using it on his former boss. In August of that year, another shoe dropped. He then thought about, again, using his rifle against his girlfriend, who was then 16 years old, and she wanted nothing more to do with him and began field threats and raping and poisoning her. He went so far as to follow her job to a local hospital. In August, he couldn't take no more life. It was time for justice he deserved, justice for battle and military fatigues. He tossed 2 guns, including an AR-15 that he bought in March, on the passenger seat, drove to McDonald's in Pershing in Kenosha. In the parking lot at the drive-thru, he grabbed his weapons, and in a panic, he locked his car behind him. At this point, he realized he locked his keys in his car, as well as his firearms. He was getting more and more confused, and rather than abort the mission, he threw the useless AR-15 on the pavement, forgetting about the spare clip in his breast pocket, and decided to forge ahead with his .44 caliber revolver. Inside the McDonald's, there were some 20 employees and customers inside. When he made the entrance, he said, "I want everybody out of here." Before anybody could move, he opened fire inside of the restaurant. A 50-year-old was shot in the head and died instantly. A 39-year-old died the next morning, and one other person received a minor injury. And then he saved the last bullet for himself, and he ended up killing himself. So a lot of these individuals have a long history of mental illness, and something that could be to blame for this is our inability to adequately help people with mental health issues. While the large majority of people who do have mental illnesses don't necessarily commit these violent crimes, but it is a pretty high propensity of individuals who do have mental illnesses. It is apparently an important predisposing factor with these rampage killers, unlike their more prevalent counterparts who target family members, coworkers, or rival gang members who seem to kill indiscriminately within a category of individuals, whether it be women or minorities, or against humankind in general. They often suffer from severe psychopathy. These individuals may be delusional or hallucinatory, killing in the course of a psychotic episode. They could be hearing voices in their head that are telling them to target certain individuals, or it could just be some sort of random massacre that they're having a breakdown at that particular moment. And there's a lot of examples where they talk about people who go on these types of rampages. One of the things that they mention in the section is the Aurora, Colorado shooting, where James Holm, who was 24 in 2012, when he directed gunfire indiscriminately at total strangers in an audience showing the Batman film. He was actually a PhD student in neuroscience at University of Colorado, and he decided to take out his frustrations at the movie theater instead of taking out the lives of his professors or his graduate committee that were kind of giving him a hard time a little bit. But this was more of an example of indiscriminate situations. So that wraps up chapter 21 on mental illness. There's a lot more here that I'm not covering, so take some time to read through the chapters. They do talk about Charles Whitman again towards the end of it, about how he had other types of mental health issues as well. So take some time to be, and it concludes by talking about how we can stop people that are mentally ill from getting involved in these types of crimes. Most of it is conjecture or guessing, but there's probably no way to completely stop these types of individuals. So you have 4 other things to read. You have an article on Omar Mateen, which I talked about just a few minutes ago, and talks about some people who he was the one that did the Orlando terrorist attack at the nightclub. There's a look at Tamerlan Tasanarov's past. It's another article on how the FBI spied on Orange County Muslims and attempted to get away with it. And then there's an article on self-generated massacre. There's 4 videos to watch. One is on the FLAN bombings, one on paranoid schizophrenia, one article on Brian Curse, who killed 6 people and injuring 10 in Palm Bay, Florida massacre. And there's another video on Dion Terrorist, who's also featured in this week's reading. On the FBI one, it's a 2-hour video. You only have to watch the middle part of it, which I have labeled here in the module overview. So there's a couple other things you should explore as well. All of these are listed in the module 13 overview. There is something that is kind of interesting. It's the University of Texas shooting. It's a silent video, but it kind of shows you about the video a little bit. So that's your reading material and your all your material for this week in Module 13. It is quite a bit. I don't expect you to read all of it word for word. Definitely read the textbook because that's what a lot of the assignments are based upon, including the quizzes. The other information is just mostly there to supplement what was already in the textbook and kind of go in a little bit more detail. So just make sure you're familiar with it. So your discussion questions this week, so you get your attendance and participation recorded. There are only 2 questions. One that discusses, I guess, one that addresses mental health and one that addresses terrorists. So just pick one of these types of questions, answer it. Some of the questions have multiple parts, so make sure that you answer both parts of the question. Respond to the questions by Thursday of this week and to your classmates by Saturday of this week. And then as far as the assignment this week, so this is kind of an interesting assignment this week. So back in week 2, I had you guys do an extra credit assignment if you chose to do it, worth 10 points, where you named some serial killers, or I listed some scenarios and you picked the serial killers. So this is kind of a fun assignment. It's not meant to be a very stressful assignment, but this one is graded. And it's basically where at the beginning you kind of looked at the serial killers to see where you were at without having necessarily done any research. But now that we've covered the majority of class, I want to see how much better you are at this. So instead of having the scenario where it gives you the scenario and then the person, this time it's giving you the person and then the scenario, and then you match the scenario to the person. It looks like there's just one question, but within that one question, you have to match 20 different situations. So this assignment is not extra credit, it is worth 20 points. So please make sure that you do that. It's kind of a fun stress. So make sure you, as you're going through it, try to do it without doing necessarily a research on it and see how many you can get right. But you could obviously have other things at your resources that you could use to find the answers as well. So I'm basically what I'm trying to do is trying to assess what you learned in what you recorded in week 2 and match it to what you've done in week 13 and see how far you've progressed. So that is what you need to know for Module 13. So just to wrap up, your reading material for this week are chapters 20 and 21, as well as the additional reading in the videos. Your 2 assignments this week are the discussion questions and the name the killer quiz, so to speak. So that's Module 13. And just to look ahead to Module 14, we are going to talk about some of the weapons that mass murderers use to kill their victims, which most of which are firearms. And your only assignment next week, we'll talk about that, is a discussion question and a quiz. So that wraps up this week's preview. If you have any questions about the material or anything I covered in this video that doesn't make any sense, please let me know. If I'm still talking a little bit too fast and it's hard to understand, I do apologize. Again, as I mentioned in previous weeks, I am trying to keep these videos around the 20-minute mark. This one looks like it's going to be one of my shorter videos where it's just over 21 minutes. But that's everything there is to know for this week. So I will see you in class and have a good week.